Chapter 17. The Last Cab Driver and the First Omnibus Cad. Of all the cabriolet drivers whom we have ever had the honor and gratification of knowing by sight, and our acquaintance in this way has been most extensive, there is one who made an impression on our mind which can never be effaced, and who awakened in our bosom a feeling of admiration and respect which we entertain a fatal presentiment will never be called forth again by any human being. He was a man of most simple and prepossessing appearance. He was a brown-whiskered, white-hatted, no-coated cabman. His nose was generally red, and his bright blue eye not unfrequently stood out in bold relief against a black border of artificial workmanship. His boots were of the Wellington form, pulled up to meet his corduroy knee-smalls, or at least to approach as near them as their dimensions would admit of, and his neck was usually garnished with a bright yellow handkerchief. In summer he carried in his mouth a flower, in winter a straw. Slight, but to a contemplative mind, certain indications of a love of nature and a taste for botany. His cabriolet was gorgeously painted, a bright red, and wherever he went, City or West End, Paddington or Holloway, north, east, west, or south, there was the red cab, bumping up against the posts at the street corners, and turning in and out among hackney coaches, and drays, and carts, and wagons, and omnibuses, and contriving by some strange means or other to get out of places which no other vehicle but the red cab could ever by any possibility have contrived to get into at all. Our fondness for that red cab was unbounded. How we should have liked to have seen it in the circle at Astley's. Our life upon it, that it should have performed such evolutions as would have put the whole company to shame, Indian chiefs, knights, Swiss peasants, and all. Some people object to the exertion of getting into cabs, and others object to the difficulty of getting out of them. We think both these are objections which take their rise in perverse and ill-conditioned minds. The getting into a cab is a very pretty and graceful process, which, when well performed, is essentially melodramatic. First, there is the expressive pantomime of every one of the 18 cabmen on the stand the moment you raise your eyes from the ground. Then there is your own pantomime in reply. Quite a little ballet. 4 cabs immediately leave the stand for your especial accommodation, and the evolutions of the animals who draw them are beautiful in the extreme, as they grate the wheels of the cabs against the curbstones and sport playfully in the kennel. You single out a particular cab and dart swiftly towards it. One bound, and you are on the first step. Turn your body lightly round to the right, and you are on the second. Bend gracefully beneath the reins, working round to the left at the same time, and you are in the cab. There is no difficulty in finding a seat. The apron knocks you comfortably into it at once, and off you go. The getting out of a cab is, perhaps, rather more complicated in its theory, and a shade more difficult in its execution. We have studied the subject a great deal, and we think the best way is to throw yourself out and trust to chance for alighting on your feet. If you make the driver alight first, and then throw yourself upon him, you will find that he breaks your fall materially. In the event of your contemplating an offer of 8pence, on no account make the tender or show the money until you are safely on the pavement. It is very bad policy attempting to save the 4pence. You are very much in the power of a cabman, and he considers it a kind of fee not to do you any wilful damage. Any instruction, however, in the art of getting out of a cab is wholly unnecessary if you are going any distance, because the probability is that you will be shot lightly out before you have completed the 3rd mile. We are not aware of any instance on record in which a cab horse has performed 3 consecutive miles without going down once. What of that? It is all excitement, and in these days of derangement of the nervous system and universal lassitude, people are content to pay handsomely for excitement. Where can it be procured at a cheaper rate? But to return to the red cab, it was omnipresent. You had but to walk down Holborn, or Fleet Street, or any of the principal thoroughfares in which there is a great deal of traffic, and judge for yourself. You had hardly turned into the street when you saw a trunk or two lying on the ground, an uprooted post, a hat box, a portmanteau, and a carpet-bag strewed about in a very picturesque manner, a horse in a cab standing by, looking about him with great unconcern, and a crowd, shouting and screaming with delight, cooling their flushed faces against the glass windows of a chemist's shop. "What's the matter here? Can you tell me?" "Only a cab, sir." "Anybody hurt, do you know?" "Only the fare, sir. I see him a-turning the corner, and I says to another gentleman, 'That's a regular little 'oss, that, and he's a-coming along rayther sweet, ain't he?' 'He just is,' says the other gentleman. Then bump they comes agin the post, and out flies the fare like bricks. Need we say it was the red cab, or that the gentleman with the straw in his mouth, who emerged so coolly from the chemist's shop and philosophically climbing into the little dickey, started off at full gallop, was the red cab's licensed driver? The ubiquity of this red cab, and the influence it exercised over the risible muscles of justice itself, was perfectly astonishing. You walked into the justice room of the mansion house, the whole court resounded with merriment. The Lord Mayor threw himself back in his chair in a state of frantic delight at his own joke. Every vein in Mr. Hobler's countenance was swollen with laughter, partly at the Lord Mayor's facetiousness, but more at his own. The constables and police officers were, as in duty bound, in ecstasies at Mr. Hobler and the Lord Mayor combined, and the very paupers, glancing respectfully at the beadle's countenance, tried to smile as even he relaxed. A tall, weazen-faced man, with an impediment in his speech, would be endeavoring to state a case of imposition against the red cab's driver, and the red cab's driver, and the Lord Mayor, and Mr. Hobler, who would be having a little fun among themselves, to the inordinate delight of everybody but the complainant. In the end, justice would be so tickled with the red cab driver's native humor that the fine would be mitigated, and he would go away full gallop in the red cab to impose on somebody else without loss of time. The driver of the red cab, confident in the strength of his own moral principles, like many other philosophers, was wont to set the feelings and opinions of society at complete defiance. Generally speaking, perhaps, he would as soon carry a fare safely to his destination as he would upset him, sooner perhaps, because in that case he not only got the money, but had the additional amusement of running a longer heat against some smart rival. But society made war upon him in the shape of penalties, and he must make war upon society in his own way. This was the reasoning of the red cab driver. So he bestowed a searching look upon the fare as he put his hand in his waistcoat pocket when he had gone half the mile to get the money ready, and if he brought forth 8 pence, out he went. The last time we saw our friend was one wet evening in Tottenham Court Road, when he was engaged in a very warm and somewhat personal altercation with a loquacious little gentleman in a green coat. Poor fellow! There were great excuses to be made for him. He had not received above 18 pence more than his fare, and consequently labored under a great deal of very natural indignation. The dispute had attained a pretty considerable height, when at last the loquacious little gentleman, making a mental calculation of the distance, and finding that he had already paid more than he ought, avowed his unalterable determination to pull up the cabman in the morning. "Now just mark this, young man," said the little gentleman. "I'll pull you up tomorrow morning." "No, will you, though?" said our friend, with a sneer. "I will," replied the little gentleman. "Mark my words, that's all. If I live till tomorrow morning, you shall repent this." There was a steadiness of purpose and indignation of speech about the little gentleman, as he took an angry pinch of snuff after this last declaration, which made a visible impression on the mind of the red cab driver. He appeared to hesitate for an instant. It was only for an instant. His resolve was soon taken. "You'll pull me up, will you?" said our friend. "I will," rejoined the little gentleman, with even greater vehemence than before. "Very well," said our friend, tucking up his shirt sleeves very calmly. "There'll be 3 weeks for that. Very good. That'll bring me up to the middle of next month. 3 weeks more would carry me on to my birthday, and then I've got £10 to draw. I may as well get board, lodging, and washing, till then, out of the country, as pay for it myself. Consequently, here goes." So, without more ado, the red cab driver knocked the little gentleman down, and then called the police to take himself into custody, with all the civility in the world. A story is nothing without the sequel, and therefore we may state that to our certain knowledge the board, lodging, and washing were all provided in due course. We happen to know the fact, for it came to our knowledge thus. We went over to the House of Correction for the country of Middlesex shortly after, to witness the operation of the silent system, and looked on all the wheels with the greatest anxiety in search of our long-lost friend. He was nowhere to be seen, however, and we began to think that the little gentleman in the green coat must have relented, when, as we were traversing the kitchen garden, which lies in a sequestered part of the prison, we were startled by hearing a voice, which apparently proceeded from the wall, pouring forth its soul in the plaintive air of "All Round My Hat," which was then just beginning to form a recognized portion of our national music. We started. "What voice is that?" said we. The governor shook his head. "Sad fellow," he replied. "Very sad. He positively refused to work on the wheel. So, after many trials, I was compelled to order him into solitary confinement. He says he likes it very much, though, and I am afraid he does, for he lies on his back on the floor and sings comic songs all day. Shall we add that our heart had not deceived us, and that the comic singer was no other than our eagerly sought friend, the red cab driver? We have never seen him since, but we have strong reason to suspect that this noble individual was a distant relative of a waterman of our acquaintance, who, on one occasion, when we were passing the coach stand over which he presides, after standing very quietly to see a tall man struggle into a cab, ran up very briskly when it was all over, as his brethren invariably do, and, touching his hat, asked, as a matter of course, for "a copper for the waterman." Now, the fare was by no means a handsome man, and, waxing very indignant at the demand, he replied, "Money? What for? Coming up and looking at me, I suppose?" "Vell, sir," rejoined the waterman with a smile of immovable complacency, "that's worth twopence." The identical waterman afterwards attained a very prominent station in society, and as we know something of his life, and have often thought of telling what we do know, perhaps we shall never have a better opportunity than the present. Mr. William Barker, then, for that was the gentleman's name, Mr. William Barker was born. But why need we relate where Mr. William Barker was born, or when? Why scrutinize the entries in parochial ledgers, or seek to penetrate the Lucinian mysteries of lying in hospitals? Mr. William Barker was born, or he had never been. There was a son, there was a father. There is an effect, there was a cause. Surely this is sufficient information for the most Fatima-like curiosity, and, if it be not, we regret our inability to supply any further evidence on the point. Can there be a more satisfactory or more strictly parliamentary course? Impossible. We at once avow a similar inability to record at what precise period, or by what particular process, this gentleman's patronymic of William Barker became corrupted into Bill Borker. Mr. Borker acquired a high standing, and no inconsiderable reputation, among the members of that profession to which he more peculiarly devoted his energies, and to them he was generally known, either by the familiar appellation of Bill Borker, or the flattering designation of Aggravatin' Bill, the latter being a playful and expressive sobriquet, illustrative of Mr. Barker's great talent in aggravatin', and rendering wild such subjects of Her Majesty as are conveyed from place to place through the instrumentality of omnibuses. Of the early life of Mr. Barker, little is known, and even that little is involved in considerable doubt and obscurity. A want of application, a restlessness of purpose, a thirsting after porter, a love of all that is roving and cadger-like in nature, shared in common with many other great geniuses, appear to have been his leading characteristics. The busy hum of a parochial free school, and the shady repose of a country jail, were alike inefficacious in producing the slightest alteration in Mr. Barker's disposition. His feverish attachment to change and variety nothing could repress. His native daring no punishment could subdue. If Mr. Barker can be fairly said to have had any weakness in his earlier years, it was an amiable one. Love. Love in its most comprehensive form, a love of ladies, liquids, and pocket handkerchiefs. It was no selfish feeling. It was not confined to his own possessions, which but too many men regard with exclusive complacency. No, it was a nobler love, a general principle. It extended itself with equal force to the property of other people. There is something very affecting in this. It is still more affecting to know that such philanthropy is but imperfectly rewarded. Bow Street, Newgate, and Millbank are a poor return for general benevolence, evincing itself in an irrepressible love for all created objects. Mr. Barker felt it so. After a lengthened interview with the highest legal authorities, he quitted his ungrateful country with the consent and at the expense of its government, proceeded to a distant shore, and there employed himself, like another Cincinnatus, in clearing and cultivating the soil. A peaceful pursuit, in which a term of 7 years glided almost imperceptibly away. Whether, at the expiration of the period we have just mentioned, the British government required Mr. Barker's presence here, or did not require his residence abroad, we have no distinct means of ascertaining. We should be inclined, however, to favor the latter position, inasmuch as we do not find that he was advanced to any other public post on his return than the post at the corner of the Haymarket, where he officiated as assistant waterman to the hackney coach stand. Seated in this capacity on a couple of tubs near the curbstone, with a brass plate and number suspended round his neck by a massive chain, and his ankles curiously enveloped in hay-bands, he is supposed to have made those observations on human nature which exercised so material an influence over all his proceedings in later life. Mr. Barker had not officiated for many months in this capacity, when the appearance of the first omnibus caused the public mind to go in a new direction, and prevented a great many hackney coaches from going in any direction at all. The genius of Mr. Barker at once perceived the whole extent of the injury that would be eventually inflicted on cab and coach stands, and, by consequence, on watermen also, by the progress of the system of which the first omnibus was a part. He saw, too, the necessity of adopting some more profitable profession, and his active mind at once perceived how much might be done in the way of enticing the youthful and unwary, and shoving the old and helpless into the wrong bus, and carrying them off, until, reduced to despair, they ransomed themselves by the payment of 6 pence a head, or, to adopt his own figurative expression in all its native beauty, till they was regularly done over and forked out the stumpy. An opportunity for realizing his fondest anticipations soon presented itself. Rumors were rife on the hackney coach stands that a bus was building to run from Lisson Grove to the Bank, down Oxford Street in Holborn, and the rapid increase of buses on the Paddington Road encouraged the idea. Mr. Barker secretly and cautiously inquired in the proper quarters. The report was correct. The Royal William was to make its first journey on the following Monday. It was a crack affair altogether. An enterprising young cabman, of established reputation as a dashing whip, for he had compromised with the parents of 3 scrunched children, and just worked out his fine for knocking down an old lady, was the driver. And the spirited proprietor, knowing Mr. Barker's qualifications, appointed him to the vacant office of cad on the very first application. The bus began to run, and Mr. Barker entered into a new suit of clothes, and on a new sphere of action. To recapitulate all the improvements introduced by this extraordinary man into the omnibus system, gradually indeed, but surely, would occupy a far greater space than we are enabled to devote to this imperfect memoir. To him is universally assigned the original suggestion of the practice which afterwards became so general, of the driver of a second bus keeping constantly behind the first one, and driving the pole of his vehicle either into the door of the other, every time it was opened, or through the body of any lady or gentleman who might make an attempt to get into it. A humorous and pleasant invention, exhibiting all that originality of idea, and fine, bold flow of spirits, so conspicuous in every action of this great man. Mr. Barker had opponents, of course. What man in public life has not? But even his worst enemies cannot deny that he has taken more old ladies and gentlemen to Paddington who wanted to go to the Bank, and more old ladies and gentlemen to the Bank who wanted to go to Paddington than any 6 men on the road. And however much malevolent spirits may pretend to doubt the accuracy of the statement, they well know it to be an established fact, that he has forcibly conveyed a variety of ancient persons of either sex to both places who had not the slightest or most distant intention of going anywhere at all. Mr. Barker was the identical cad who nobly distinguished himself, some time since, by keeping a tradesman on the step, the omnibus going at full speed all the time, till he had thrashed him to his entire satisfaction, and finally throwing him away when he had quite done with him. Mr. Barker it ought to have been, who, honestly indignant at being ignominiously ejected from a house of public entertainment, kicked the landlord in the knee, and thereby caused his death. We say it ought to have been Mr. Barker, because the action was not a common one, and could have emanated from no ordinary mind. It has now become a matter of history. It is recorded in the Newgate calendar, and we wish we could attribute this piece of daring heroism to Mr. Barker. We regret being compelled to state that it was not performed by him. Would, for the family credit, we could add that it was achieved by his brother. It was in the exercise of the nicer details of his profession that Mr. Barker's knowledge of human nature was beautifully displayed. He could tell at a glance where a passenger wanted to go to, and would shout the name of the place accordingly, without the slightest reference to the real destination of the vehicle. He knew exactly the kind of old lady that would be too much flurried by the process of pushing in and pulling out of the caravan to discover where she had been put down until too late, had an intuitive perception of what was passing in a passenger's mind when he inwardly resolved to pull that cat up tomorrow morning, and never failed to make himself agreeable to female servants, whom he would place next the door and talk to all the way. Human judgment is never infallible, and it would occasionally happen that Mr. Barker experimentalized with the timidity or forbearance of the wrong person, in which case a summons to a police office was, on more than one occasion, followed by a committal to prison. It was not in the power of trifles such as these, however, to subdue the freedom of his spirit. As soon as they passed away, he resumed the duties of his profession with unabated ardor. We have spoken of Mr. Barker and of the red cab driver in the past tense. Alas, Mr. Barker has again become an absentee, and the class of men to which they both belonged is fast disappearing. Improvement has peered beneath the aprons of our cabs, and penetrated to the very innermost recesses of our omnibuses. Dirt and fustian will vanish before cleanliness and livery. Slang will be forgotten when civility becomes general, and that enlightened, eloquent, sage, and profound body, the magistracy of London, will be deprived of half their amusement and half their occupation. Chapter 18. A Parliamentary Sketch. We hope our readers will not be alarmed at this rather ominous title. We assure them that we are not about to become political, neither have we the slightest intention of being more prosy than usual, if we can help it. It has occurred to us that a slight sketch of the general aspect of the House, and the crowds that resort to it on the night of an important debate, would be productive of some amusement. And as we have made some few calls at the aforesaid house in our time, have visited it quite often enough for our purpose, and a great deal too often for our personal peace and comfort, we have determined to attempt the description. Dismissing from our minds, therefore, all that feeling of awe, which vague ideas of breaches of privilege, sergeant-at-arms, heavy denunciations, and still heavier fees are calculated to awaken, we enter at once into the building and upon our subject. 4:30 o'clock, and at 5 the mover of the address will be on his legs, as the newspapers announce, sometimes by way of novelty, as if speakers were occasionally in the habit of standing on their heads. The members are pouring in, one after the other, in shoals. The few spectators who can obtain standing room in the passages scrutinize them as they pass with the utmost interest, and the man who can identify a member occasionally becomes a person of great importance. Every now and then you hear earnest whispers of, "That's Sir John Thompson," "Which? Him with the gilt order round his neck? No, no, that's one of the messengers. That other with the yellow gloves is Sir John Thompson. Here's Mr. Smith. Lor! Yes, how do you do, sir? He is our new member. How do you do, sir?" Mr. Smith stops, turns around with an air of enchanting urbanity, for the rumor of an intended dissolution has been very extensively circulated this morning, seizes both hands of his gratified constituent, and, after greeting him with the most enthusiastic warmth, darts into the lobby with an extraordinary display of ardor in the public cause, leaving an immense impression in his favor on the mind of his fellow townsmen. The arrivals increase in number, and the heat and noise increase in very unpleasant proportion. The livery servants form a complete lane on either side of the passage, and you reduce yourself into the smallest possible space to avoid being turned out. You see that stout man with the hoarse voice in the blue coat, queer-crowned, broad-brimmed hat, white corduroy breeches, and great boots, who has been talking incessantly for half an hour past, and whose importance has occasioned no small quantity of mirth among the strangers. That is the great conservator of the peace of Westminster. You cannot fail to have remarked the grace with which he saluted the noble lord who passed just now, or the excessive dignity of his air, as he expostulates with the crowd. He is rather out of temper now, in consequence of the very irreverent behavior of those two young fellows behind him, who have done nothing but laugh all the time they have been here. "Will they divide tonight, you think, Mr.?" timidly inquires a little thin man in the crowd, hoping to conciliate the man of office. "How can you ask such questions, sir?" replies the functionary in an incredibly loud key, and pettishly grasping the thick stick he carries in his right hand. "Pray do not, sir. I beg of you, pray do not, sir." The little man looks remarkably out of his element, and the uninitiated part of the throng are in positive convulsions of laughter. Just at this moment, some unfortunate individual appears, with a very smirking air, at the bottom of the long passage. He has managed to elude the vigilance of the special constable downstairs, and is evidently congratulating himself on having made his way so far. "Go back, sir! You must not come here!" shouts the hoarse one, with tremendous emphasis of voice and gesture, the moment the offender catches his eye. The stranger pauses. "Do you hear, sir? Will you go back?" continues the official dignitary, gently pushing the intruder some half-dozen yards. "Come, don't push me," replies the stranger, turning angrily round. "I will, sir." "You won't, sir." "Go out, sir." "Take your hands off me, sir." "Go out of the passage, sir." "You're a jack-in-office, sir." "A what?" ejaculates he of the boots. "A jack-in-office, sir, and a very insolent fellow," reiterates the stranger, now completely in a passion. "Pray do not force me to put you out, sir," retorts the other. "Pray do not. My instructions are to keep this passage clear. It's the Speaker's orders, sir." "Damn the Speaker, sir!" shouts the intruder. "Here, Wilson, Collins," gasps the officer, actually paralyzed at this insulting expression, which in his mind is all but high treason. "Take this man out. Take him out, I say." "How dare you, sir?" And down goes the unfortunate man 5 stairs at a time, turning round at every stoppage, to come back again, in denouncing bitter vengeance against the commander-in-chief and all his supernumeraries. "Make way, gentlemen! Pray make way for the members, I beg you!" shouts the zealous officer, turning back and preceding a whole string of the Liberal and Independent. You see this ferocious-looking gentleman, with a complexion almost as sallow as his linen, and whose large black mustache would give him the appearance of a figure in a hairdresser's window, if his countenance possessed the thought which is communicated to those waxen caricatures of the human face divine. He is a militia officer, and the most amusing person in the house. Can anything be more exquisitely absurd than the burlesque grandeur of his air, as he strides up to the lobby, his eyes rolling like those of a Turk's head in a cheap Dutch clock? He never appears without that bundle of dirty papers which he carries under his left arm, and which are generally supposed to be the miscellaneous estimates for 1804, or some equally important documents. He is very punctual in his attendance at the house, and his self-satisfied "Here, here," is not unfrequently the signal for a general titter. This is the gentleman who once actually sent a messenger up to the strangers' gallery in the old House of Commons to inquire the name of an individual who was using an eyeglass, in order that he might complain to the Speaker that the person in question was quizzing him. On another occasion, He is reported to have repaired to Bellamy's kitchen, a refreshment room, where persons who are not members are admitted on sufferance, as it were, and perceiving 2 or 3 gentlemen at supper, who he was aware were not members, and could not in that place very well resent his behavior, he indulged in the pleasantry of sitting with his booted leg on the table at which they were supping. He is generally harmless, though, and always amusing. By dint of patience, and some little interest with our friend the constable, we have contrived to make our way to the lobby, and you can just manage to catch an occasional glimpse of the house as the door is opened for the admission of members. It is tolerably full already, and little groups of members are congregated together here, discussing the interesting topics of the day. That smart-looking fellow in the black coat with velvet facings and cuffs, who wears his D'Orsay hat so rakishly, is Honest Tom, a metropolitan representative, and the large man in the cloak with the white lining, not the man by the pillar, the other with the light hair hanging over his coat collar behind, is his colleague. The quiet, gentlemanly-looking man in blue surtout, gray trousers, white neckerchief, and gloves, whose closely buttoned coat displays his manly figure and broad chest to great advantage, is a very well-known character. He has fought a great many battles in his time, and conquered like the heroes of old, with no other arms than those the gods gave him. The old, hard-featured man who is standing near him is really a good specimen of a class of men now nearly extinct. He is a county member, and has been from time whereof the memory of man is not to the contrary. Look at his loose, wide, brown coat, with capacious pockets on each side, the knee breeches and boots, the immensely long waistcoat, and silver watch chain dangling below it, and the wide-brimmed brown hat, and the white handkerchief tied in a great bow, with straggling ends sticking out beyond his shirt frill. It is a costume one seldom sees nowadays, and when the few who wear it have died off, it will be quite extinct. He can tell you long stories of Fox, Pitt, Sheridan, and Canning, and how much better the house was managed in those times, when they used to get up at 8 or 9 o'clock, except on regular field days, of which everybody was apprised beforehand. He has a great contempt for all young members of Parliament, and thinks it quite impossible that a man can say anything worth hearing unless he has sat in the House for 15 years at least, without saying anything at all. He is of opinion that young Macaulay was a regular impostor. He allows that Lord Stanley may do something one of these days, but he's too young, sir, too young. He is an excellent authority on points of precedent, and when he grows talkative, after his wine, will tell you how Sir Somebody Something, when he was whipperin' for the government, brought 4 men out of their beds to vote in the majority, 3 of whom died on their way home again. How the House once divided on the question that fresh candles be now brought in. How the Speaker was once upon a time left in the chair by accident, at the conclusion of business, and was obliged to sit in the House by himself for 3 hours, till some member could be knocked up and brought back again to move the adjournment, and a great many other anecdotes of a similar description. There he stands, leaning on his stick, looking at the throng of exquisites round him with most profound contempt, and conjuring up, before his mind's eye, the scenes he beheld in the old house in days gone by, when his own feelings were fresher and brighter, and when, as he imagines, wit, talent, and patriotism flourished more brightly too. You are curious to know who that young man in the rough greatcoat is, who has accosted every member who has entered the house since we have been standing here. He is not a member. He is only an hereditary bondsman, or, in other words, an Irish correspondent of an Irish newspaper, who has just procured his 42nd franc from a member whom he never saw in his life before. There he goes again, another. Bless the man, he has his hat and pockets full already. We will try our fortune at the Strangers' Gallery, though the nature of the debate encourages very little hope of success. What on earth are you about? Holding up your order as if it were a talisman at whose command the wicket would fly open. Nonsense. Just preserve the order for an autograph, if it be worth keeping at all, and make your appearance at the door with your thumb and forefinger expressively inserted in your waistcoat pocket. This tall, stout man in black is the doorkeeper. Any room? Not an inch. 2 or 3 dozen gentlemen waiting downstairs on the chance of somebody's going out. Pull out your purse. Are you quite sure there's no room? I'll go and look, replies the doorkeeper, with a wistful glance at your purse. But I'm afraid there's not. He returns, and with real feeling assures you that it is morally impossible to get near the gallery. It is of no use waiting. When you are refused admission into the Strangers' Gallery at the House of Commons under such circumstances, you may return home thoroughly satisfied that the place must be remarkably full indeed. Retracing our steps through the long passage, descending the stairs, and crossing Palace Yard, we halt at a small temporary doorway adjoining the King's entrance to the House of Lords. The order of the Sergeant-at-Arms will admit you into the Reporters' Gallery, from whence you can obtain a tolerably good view of the house. Take care of the stairs, they are none of the best. Through this little wicket, there. As soon as your eyes become a little used to the mist of the place, and the glare of the chandeliers below you, you will see that some unimportant personage on the ministerial side of the house, to your right hand, is speaking, amidst a hum of voices and confusion which would rival Babel, but for the circumstance of its being all in one language. The "hear, hear," which occasioned that laugh, proceeded from our warlike friend with the mustache. He is sitting on the back seat against the wall, behind the member who is speaking, looking as ferocious and intellectual as usual. Take one look around you, and retire. The body of the house and the side galleries are full of members, some with their legs on the back of the opposite seat, some with theirs stretched to their utmost length on the floor, some going out, others coming in, all talking, laughing, lounging, coughing, owing, questioning, or groaning, presenting a conglomeration of noise and confusion to be met with in no other place in existence, not even excepting Smithfield on a market day, or a cockpit in its glory. But let us not omit to notice Bellamy's kitchen, or, in other words, the refreshment room, common to both Houses of Parliament, where ministerialists and oppositionists, Whigs and Tories, radicals, peers, and destructives, strangers from the gallery, and the more favored strangers from below the bar, are alike at liberty to resort, where divers honorable members prove their perfect independence by remaining during the whole of a heavy debate, solacing themselves with the creature comforts, and whence they are summoned by whippers-in when the House is on the point of dividing, either to give their conscientious votes on questions of which they are conscientiously innocent of knowing anything whatever, or to find a vent for the playful exuberance of their wine-inspired fancies in boisterous shouts of "Divide!" occasionally varied with a little howling, barking, crowing, or other ebullitions of senatorial pleasantry. When you have ascended the narrow staircase which, in the present temporary House of Commons, leads to the place we are describing, you will probably observe a couple of rooms on your right hand with tables spread for dining. Neither of these is the kitchen, although they are both devoted to the same purpose. The kitchen is further on to our left, up these half-dozen stairs. Before we ascend the staircase, however, we must request you to pause in front of this little bar place with the sash windows, and beg your particular attention to the steady, honest-looking old fellow in black, who is its sole occupant. Nicholas, we do not mind mentioning the old fellow's name, for if Nicholas be not a public man, who is? And public men's names are public property. Nicholas is the butler of Bellamy's, and has held the same place, dressed exactly in the same manner, and said precisely the same things, ever since the oldest of its present visitors can remember. An excellent servant Nicholas is, an unrivaled compounder of salad dressing, an admirable preparer of soda water and lemon, a special mixer of cold grog and punch, and, above all, an unequaled judge of cheese. If the old man have such a thing as vanity in his composition, this is certainly his pride. And if it be possible to imagine that anything in this world could disturb his impenetrable calmness, we should say it would be the doubting his judgment on this important point. We needn't tell you all this, however, for if you have an atom of observation, one glance at his sleek, knowing-looking head and face, his prim white neckerchief, with the wooden tie into which it has been regularly folded for 20 years past, merging by imperceptible degrees into a small plaited shirt frill, and his comfortable-looking form encased in a well-brushed suit of black, would give you a better idea of his real character than a column of our poor description could convey. Nicholas is rather out of his element now. He cannot see the kitchen as he used to in the old house. There, one window of his glass case opened into the room, and then, for the edification and behoof of more juvenile questioners, he would stand for an hour together, answering deferential questions about Sheridan, and Percival, and Castlereagh, and heaven knows who beside, with magnificent delight, always inserting a Mr. before every commoner's name. Nicholas, like all men of his age and standing, has a great idea of the degeneracy of the times. He seldom expresses any political opinion, but we managed to ascertain, just before the passing of the Reform Bill, that Nicholas was a thorough reformer. What was our astonishment to discover, shortly after the meeting of the first Reformed Parliament, that he was a most inveterate and decided Tory. It was very odd. Some men change their opinions from necessity, others from expediency, others from inspiration. But that Nicholas should undergo any change in any respect was an event we had never contemplated, and should have considered impossible. His strong opinion against the clause which empowered the metropolitan districts to return members to Parliament, too, was perfectly unaccountable. We discovered the secret at last. The metropolitan members always dined at home. The rascals! As for giving additional members to Ireland, it was even worse. Decidedly unconstitutional. Why, sir, an Irish member would go up there and eat more dinner than 3 English members put together. He took no wine, drank table beer by the half-gallon, and went home to Manchester Buildings or Melbeck Street for his whiskey and water. And what was the consequence? Why, the concern lost. Actually lost, sir, by his patronage. A queer old fellow is Nicholas, and as completely a part of the building as the house itself. We wonder he ever left the old place, and fully expected to see in the papers, the morning after the fire, a pathetic account of an old gentleman in black, of decent appearance, who was seen at one of the upper windows when the flames were at their height, and declared his resolute intention of falling with the floor. He must have been got out by force. However, he was got out. Here he is again, looking, as he always does, as if he had been in a bandbox ever since the last session. There he is, at his old post every night, just as we have described him, and, as characters are scarce, and faithful servants scarcer, long may he be there, say we. Now, when you have taken your seat in the kitchen, and duly noticed the large fire and roasting jack at one end of the room, the little table for washing glasses and draining jugs at the other, the clock over the window opposite St. Margaret's Church, the deal tables and wax candles, the damask tablecloths and bare floor, the plate and china on the tables, and the gridiron on the fire, and a few other anomalies peculiar to the place, we will point out to your notice 2 or 3 of the people present, whose station or absurdities render them the most worthy of remark. It is 12:30 o'clock, and as the division is not expected for an hour or 2, a few members are lounging away the time here in preference to standing at the bar of the house, or sleeping in one of the side galleries. That singularly awkward and ungainly-looking man, in the brownish-white hat, with the straggling black trousers which reach about halfway down to the leg of his boots, who is leaning against the meat screen, apparently deluding himself into the belief that he is thinking about something, is a splendid sample of a member of the House of Commons concentrating in his own person the wisdom of a constituency. Observe the wig, of a dark hue but indescribable color, for if it be naturally brown, it has acquired a black tint by long service, and if it be naturally black, the same cause has imparted to it a tinge of rusty brown. And remark how very materially the great blinker-like spectacles assist the expression of that most intelligent face. Seriously speaking, did you ever see a countenance so expressive of the most hopeless extreme of heavy dullness, or behold a form so strangely put together? He is no great speaker, but when he does address the House, the effect is absolutely irresistible. The small gentleman with the sharp nose, who has just saluted him, is a member of Parliament, an ex-alderman, and a sort of amateur fireman. He and the celebrated fireman's dog were observed to be remarkably active at the conflagration of the 2 Houses of Parliament. They both ran up and down, and in and out, getting under people's feet and into everybody's way, fully impressed with the belief that they were doing a great deal of good, and barking tremendously. The dog went quietly back to his kennel with the engine, but the gentleman kept up such an incessant noise for some weeks after the occurrence that he became a positive nuisance. As no more parliamentary fires have occurred, however, and as he has consequently had no more opportunities of writing to the newspapers to relate how, by way of preserving pictures, he cut them out of their frames, and performed other great national services, he has gradually relapsed into his old state of calmness. That female in black, not the one whom the Lord's Day Bill Baronet has just chucked under the chin, the shorter of the two, is Jane, the Hebe of Bellamy's. Jane is as great a character as Nicholas in her way. Her leading features are a thorough contempt for the great majority of her visitors. Her predominant quality, love of admiration, as you cannot fail to observe. If you mark the glee with which she listens to something the young member near her mutters somewhat unintelligibly in her ear, for his speech is rather thick from some cause or other, and how playfully she digs the handle of a fork into the arm with which he detains her, by way of reply. Jane is no bad hand at repartees, and showers them about with a degree of liberality and total absence of reserve or constraint, which occasionally excites no small amazement in the minds of strangers. She cuts jokes with Nicholas, too, but looks up to him with a great deal of respect. The immovable stolidity with which Nicholas receives the aforesaid jokes, and looks on at certain pastoral friskings and rompings, Jane's only recreations, and they are very innocent too, which occasionally take place in the passage, is not the least amusing part of his character. The two persons who are seated at the table in the corner, at the farther end of the room, have been constant guests here for many years past, and one of them has feasted within these walls many a time with the most brilliant characters of a brilliant period. He has gone up to the other house since then. The greater part of his boon companions have shared York's fate, and his visit to Bellamy's are comparatively few. If he really be eating his supper now, at what hour can he possibly have dined? A second solid mass of rump steak has disappeared, and he ate the first in 4 minutes and 3/4 by the clock over the window. Was there ever such a personification of Falstaff? Mark the air with which he gloats over that Stilton, as he removes the napkin which has been placed beneath his chin to catch the superfluous gravy of the steak, and with what gusto he imbibes the porter which has been fetched, expressly for him, in the pewter pot. Listen to the hoarse sound of that voice, kept down as it is by layers of solids, and deep draughts of rich wine, and tell us if you ever saw such a perfect picture of a regular gourmand, and whether he is not exactly the man whom you would pitch upon as having been the partner of Sheridan's parliamentary carouses, the volunteer driver of the hackney coach that took him home, and the involuntary upsetter of the whole party. What an amusing contrast between his voice and appearance, and that of the spare, squeaking old man who sits at the same table, and who, elevating a little cracked bantam sort of voice to its highest pitch, invokes damnation upon his own eyes or somebody else's at the commencement of every sentence he utters. The captain, as they call him, is a very old frequenter of Bellamy's, much addicted to stopping after the house is up, an inexpiable crime in Jane's eyes, and a complete walking reservoir of spirits and water. The old peer, or rather the old man, for his peerage is of comparatively recent date, has a huge tumbler of hot punch brought him, and the other dams and drinks and dams, and smokes. Members arrive every moment in a great bustle to report that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is up, and to get glasses of brandy and water to sustain them during the division. People who have ordered supper countermand it, and prepare to go downstairs, when suddenly a bell is heard to ring with tremendous violence, and the cry of "Division!" is heard in the passage. This is enough. Away rush the members pell-mell. The room is cleared in an instant. The noise rapidly dies away. You hear the creaking of the last boot on the last stair, and are left alone with the Leviathan of rump steaks.